All right, hi you guys. Hopefully this recording out here works okay, like my dogs and there's people driving by and stuff. But my first chapter chat I think was out here on my porch, and so I figured just for nice kind of wrap up, I would do my last chapter chat out on my porch again. It's an absolutely beautiful morning, and it's kind of ironic to be out here in such a beautiful day talking about the end of this book, Night. But I definitely feel more appreciative of these incredible conditions every time I read this story. So here it is. This is the end of book chapter chat. I went back and forth about whether or not I should do a 7, an 8, and a 9, but I really see this as kind of the end of this story, and so I'm going to kind of talk about them all together. So I want to start by revisiting this idea that they're back on cattle cars. Talked about that a little bit in yesterday's chapter chat. There are some important contrasts that I think that this structural decision allows for. First, when they were in cattle cars on their way to the concentration camps, there were 80 people in a car. There are now 100 people in the car to start. They do note that as they make their journey toward Buchenwald, is I think how you say that they continuously offload the dead, just kind of throw them out of the car. So I don't know how many there are when they arrive, but they start at 100. So that really reveals kind of the difference in their physical condition. They couldn't barely sit down when there were 80 people. There wasn't enough room. They had to take turns. And here they're kind of laying and sprawled out and taking up more space. And there's still room for 20 more people. So that shows you their physical condition, just how emaciated they are from being starved and worked. There'll be some pictures at the beginning of this, and there's lots of pictures of just how skinny and starved the Jewish inmates were during this time. They also say in chapter 2, when they're in the cattle cars, that they saved their rations, and their principle was to economize and to share their resources because they knew that tomorrow could be worse. And so they shared their food and they saved their food, and we see that contrasted pretty starkly when we see them kill each other for pieces of bread. The most horrible of these instances, of course, when the son kills his father for a crumb of bread, and then the son is killed too. And Wiesel talks about the two corpses lying there together and how sad a scene that really is. So there's this idea to work together in chapter 2, and to really pool their resources. And then the quote I always come back to when I read 7, when they're talking about the bread, is he calls them beasts of prey unleashed, animal hate in their eyes, and extraordinary vitality possessed them, sharpening their teeth and nails. And this metaphor of the Jewish inmates being beasts, I think, gets us to the end of this process of dehumanization, that these humans have been reduced to beasts fighting and willing to kill even the people in their lives that are most important to them for basic survival. And Wiesel is even talking about people this way. So I think that that's a really powerful metaphor. And this time while reading this book, I noticed meerkats ask the question, why don't they just shoot us instead of taking them on these death marches and letting them starve to death and kill each other? And it's the first time that I had really even noticed that part of the story. I mean, I don't know the question, but I wonder that too, if the goal was just to exterminate all Jews and to kill them all, why in these moments didn't they just shoot everybody? What was the benefit of torturing and working them to death and dragging out this process? That's a question that's just in my brain. I'll probably do some research later. I'm sure some people have speculated about that idea. Chapter 8, we see Wiesel struggle with his dad dies. We knew from the beginning, I think, that Wiesel survives this ordeal, but he's the only person in his family that does. His mother and sister die the day that they get to the concentration camps. We assume when they go, men left, women to the right. I may have done that backwards, but that's the last time he ever sees his mother and sister, and his dad dies at the very end of their journey. This is the chapter that's most emotional for me. I don't know if that's, I lost my dad when I was in my early 20s, and he got sick when I was a teenager, and I kind of watched him suffer through that process. And so I think maybe I kind of relate to that, or it triggers my own personal life experiences in some way. But I do think that there's something really unnatural about watching a parent become so weak. I think that it's kind of a biological or a natural thing, and I'm speculating here. I think it's really a natural thing for us to be protected by our parents, and Wiesel is 16 here, and that's something that most of you can relate to. At 16, you really look to your parents to be the strength, and to watch them kind of crumble and fall apart is really unnatural. And Wiesel struggles with this process throughout this memoir, and then at the end, when his dad finally dies, he kind of expresses to us that if he could find words to express how he felt in that moment, he would say, "Free at last." And that's kind of like a gut-punching moment for me as a reader and as a person, just to think about the people that you love so much to become like a burden in such a dramatic way. And he says to us that in this moment he was ashamed and would be ashamed forever. Of how he kind of responded in this moment. And I think that that's probably true. He was ashamed forever, since he wrote this book so many years later, that this is kind of the source of his everlasting guilt about how he responded to this event in his life. And brings us back to Rabbi Elihu's son, and explains that in these final moments, just like Rabbi Elihu's son, he did not pass the test of whether or not you'll do the right thing when the circumstances are this dire. And this is one of the greatest questions that this book poses for me as a reader. And it is how do we respond to circumstances like this? Like, what is that darkness of the human spirit, or what is that? And I think that might be how he's using night. In chapter 1, I talked about wanting to pay more attention to the use of night and what night actually means. And I think that night means darkness in all of its many forms and meanings. I think nighttime, in chapter 7, he says night is growing longer and longer. And I think that night is metaphorical for the loss of faith in both God and humanity, for the madness that we're capable of as human beings, for the horrors of the world, and the kind of tragic selfishness and hatred and prejudice. I think that it actually means all of that. It means kind of all of the things that lead to suffering. And when he talks about not passing the test, it brings up the question for me about whether or not I would pass the test in those moments, and how I would go about passing those tests. In these last few chapters, he kind of messes with that a lot, about giving his dad his last bits of soup, and he doesn't want to, and the other inmate says, you need to not do that, right? You need to take care of yourself. It's every man for himself here. And these lines around kind of taking care of yourself and being responsible for the well-being of others, I think that those are lines that we as humans have to kind of sort out all of the time. To what extent do I give to people who have higher needs than I do? To what extent do I just take care of myself and my own? How responsible am I for the suffering of the rest of the world? Those are really hard questions. And although this is maybe not the most appropriate time to talk about the little sufferings that happen all of the time in the community around me, I do think that Wiesel wants for us to think about these. Once we have a moment, I of course have read this book before, but once we've had a few moments to just kind of process this horrible thing, I think one of his purposes is that he wants to kind of activate the activist in each of us by posing some of these questions and by being really honest about the man that he was during these times. And this event, for him, kind of pushed him into a life of activism, and he continued for the rest of his life until he died in 2017, working toward peace. And we'll talk through some of what he's done since then when we come back from spring break. But that's kind of where I end with this. The corpse that looks back at him in the end is probably a piece of him forever and ever and ever. And I think I'm gonna leave it there and wait until I hear all of your guys' responses and we get an opportunity to talk a little bit more when you guys all get back from break. So that was Night. I hope it was a relatively good experience for all of you to read through this book. It is a true story memoir. There's lots of Holocaust literature and lots of resources if you want to continue to learn about this part of our history. And just let me know if you want some guidance at the beginning of your reading journals. There are some links to the Holocaust Museum, and there's lots of great resources there too. So I look forward to, sorry, my dogs are going crazy. I look forward to reading your journals for these last few chapters, and especially your end of book response, where you actually just take a minute and think about what it was like for you to read this memoir. It's weird to do it in distance learning since we weren't all able to kind of process it together, but I've loved reading your journals and hearing from you in our Zoom meetings and stuff. So that is it for chapter chats. I think I'm not sure yet if I'll do some sharing of anything else as we move forward. I'm kind of playing it by ear, as you guys are too. So thanks for taking this ride with me, and I will talk to y'all soon.